Thank you for stopping by at the Movie Marquee. Our podcast reviews well-known movies and contains spoilers. The podcast may contain mature subject matter and mature language. Listener discretion is advised. Enjoy the show.
Quiet on set. Places, everybody. And action.
Welcome, everyone, to the Movie Marquee. Today's showing will be the 1972 Sydney Pollack American Western, Jeremiah Johnson. With me today is Ken.
You're the same dumb pilgrim that I've been hearing for 20 days and smelling for 3.
And Ted.
Do you know where I can find beaver, bear, and other critters that are worth cash money when skinned?
Not off the top of my head, but maybe at the end of this review, we'll be able to answer that question.
Cool.
And speaking of questions, where are you heading? Same place you are, Jeremiah. Hell, in the end. Ken, what do you got for the particulars of Jeremiah Johnson?
Jeremiah Johnson was directed by Sydney Pollack. Screenplay by Edward Anhalt and John Millis. Story by Raymond Thorpe and Robert Bunker. They both wrote Crow Killer, and then this is also based on Mountain Man by Vardis Fisher. Produced by Joe Wiesen. Cinematography by Duke Callahan. Edited by Thomas Stanford. Music by Tim McIntyre and John Rubenstein. Production company is Sanford Productions. It was distributed by Warner Brothers. It was released on May 7th, 1972 at the Cannes Film Festival, and then it had a worldwide release on December 21st, 1972. It has a running time of 116 minutes, but if you remove the overture and the intermissions, you get it down to 108 minutes. It had a budget of $3.1 million, and it made $44.7 million at the box office. And it stars Robert Redford as Jeremiah Johnson, Will Geer as Bear Claw Chris Lapp, Stefan Giersak as Del Gu, Del Bolton as Swan, Josh Albee as Caleb, Joaquin Martinez as Pants His Shirt Red, Aylin Ann McLear as the Crazy Woman, Paul Benedict as Reverend Lundquist, and Jack Colvin as Lieutenant Mulvey.
No one can just have easy names anymore, can they?
No, and if I mispronounced any of your names, most of you are dead anyway, so it's okay.
Can't have a movie starring John Smith,
Right.
Ed Jones.
John Doe.
Yeah, John Doe. Yeah, so just crazy stuff there. Yeah, it's funny, Ken, you mentioned that about the overture and the intermission. I don't know why this movie had an overture and an intermission, to be honest with you. It must have been fun to see this thing in first release in 1972 and have to sit through 13 minutes of an intermission and overture. I don't know why it had it, but...
It's not like it's 3 hours long. I mean, it's not even 2 hours long, and it needs an intermission.
It's crazy.
I'm going to go into that after we're done with everything here, because that's...
and we will.
That's something I don't understand either.
Speaking of things we don't understand, what did the critics think of this, Ken?
The critics really liked this movie. It scored a 95% on the tomato meter and also had an 89% audience score. The critics' consensus is Jeremiah Johnson's deliberate pace demands an investment from the viewer, but it's rewarded with a thoughtful drama anchored by a stirring performance from Robert Redford. Don Drunker of the Chicago Reader says the dialogue is spare and the scenery the real star. Satisfying and impressive. Marcel Meyer of the Austin Chronicle says, a gritty, cinematic tall tale that resonates across geography, time, and the loneliest regions of the solitary heart. Variety staff said, Director Sydney Pollack has given a skilled, observant mounting as it carefully allows the man to grow in experience and know-how. William Thomas of Empire magazine says, Pollack does right to put his faith in one man and a whole lot of mountains. The results is impressive. He gave it a 4 out of 5. Tom Mine of Time Out says, a flawed but immensely appealing film. And I'll finish it off here with Roger Greenspun of the New York Times. He said, there are moments of great beauty and terror and deeply earned pathos. There are as well such not-so-incidental pleasures as John Rubinstein's lovely and serviceable musical score and a cast of excellent supporting actors. Really, there was no negative reviews that I could find, but our reviews are coming up, so we'll see what happens then.
And how ironic that we couldn't find anything for our good friend Roger Ebert on reviewing this movie.
Yeah, that's awful odd. But all those reviews, I think they highlight a lot of how I feel about the movie, amazingly enough. A lot of it's about how it's shot and the mountains and everything like that.
The cinematography in this movie is clearly the co-star.
It's second
Let's be
to none.
honest.
Should have said Robert Redford and then the
The
mountains.
State of Utah in Jeremiah
Right.
Johnson. Ted, you got a plot for us on this movie?
I sure do. Jeremiah Johnson.
Was a bullfrog.
He was a good friend of mine. The Mexican-American veteran Jeremiah Johnson takes up the life of a mountain man, supporting himself in the Rocky Mountains as a trapper. His first winter in mountain country is difficult, and he has a run-in with Paints His Shirt Red, a chief of the Crow tribe. He starts out with a .30 caliber Hawken percussion rifle until he finds the frozen body of mountain man Hatchet Jack clutching a .50 caliber Hawken rifle. Jack's will gives his rifle to the man who finds his corpse. With his new rifle, Johnson inadvertently disrupts the grizzly bear hunt of the elderly and eccentric Chris Lapp, nicknamed Bearclaw, who mentors him on living in the high country. After a brush with the crows, including Lapp's friend Paints His Shirt Red, and learning the skills required to survive, Johnson sets off on his own. He comes across a cabin whose inhabitants were apparently attacked by Blackfoot warriors, leaving only a woman and her uncommunicative son alive. The woman, maddened by grief, forces Johnson to adopt her son. He and the boy, who Johnson dubs Caleb, come across Dalgu, a mountain man who has been robbed by the Blackfeet, who have buried him to his neck in sand and stuffed feathers up his nose. Gu persuades Johnson to help recover his stolen goods, but Johnson counsels against violence when they find the Blackfoot camp. The men sneak into the camp at night to retrieve Gu's possessions, but Gu opens fire and the mountain men then kill the Blackfeet. Gu takes several Blackfoot horses and scalps. Johnson, disgusted with the needless killing, returns to Caleb. Soon afterward, they are surprised by Christianized Flatheads, who take them in as guests of honor. Johnson unknowingly places the chief in his debt by giving him the stolen horses and scalps of the Blackfoot, their mortal enemy. According to a Flathead custom, to maintain his honor, the chief must now either kill him or give him a greater gift. The chief gives his daughter Swan to be Johnson's bride. After the wedding, Gu goes off on his own, and Johnson, Caleb, and Swan journey into the wilderness. Johnson finds a suitable location to build a cabin. They settle into this new home and slowly become a family. Johnson is pressed by a troop of U.S. Army cavalry to lead a search party to save a stranded wagon train of settlers. Johnson is reluctant to leave his family to help, but is pressed and reluctantly changes his mind. The train's commanding officer, Lieutenant Mulvey, ignores Johnson's advice not to travel through a sacred Crow burial ground, and has Johnson lead them. While returning home by the same route, Johnson notices that the graves are now adorned with Swan's blue trinkets. He rushes back to the cabin, where he finds that his family has been killed. Johnson sets off after the warriors who killed his family and attacks them, killing all but one, a heavy-set man who sings his death song when he realizes he cannot escape. Johnson leaves him alive, and the survivor spreads the tale of the mountain man's quest for revenge throughout the region, trapping Johnson in a feud with the Crow. The tribe sends its best warriors to kill Johnson, but he defeats them. His legend grows, and the Crow come to respect him. He meets Gu again and returns to the cabin of Caleb's mother, only to find that she has died and a new settler named Quaylen and his family are living there. Nearby, the Crow have built a monument to Johnson's bravery, periodically leaving trinkets and talismans as tribute. Johnson and Lapp meet for a final time. It is at this poignant meeting between student and teacher that Lapp realizes the heavy toll that fighting an entire nation alone in a vast and lonesome frontier has taken on Johnson. Lapp's realization occurs when Johnson queries, "You wouldn't happen to know what month of the year it is?" Lapp simply replies, "No, I truly wouldn't. I'm sorry, Pilgrim." Johnson later has a wordless encounter with Paints His Shirt Red, presumed to be behind the attacks. While sitting astride their horses far apart, Johnson reaches for his rifle, but Paints His Shirt Red raises his arm, open-palmed, in a gesture of peace that Johnson slowly returns, signaling an end to their conflict. The film ends with the song lyrics, and some folks say he's up there still.
Leaving us open for a sequel.
Exactly.
Ted.
Yes.
When was the first time you saw this movie?
The day you told me that this is the movie we were going to be doing.
Look at that.
Yeah, this is the first time I've seen it, and I've watched it a few times to get in preparation for the podcast, and it's one of those movies I'm surprised, ultimately, that it had never crossed my path. Kind of disappointing that it hadn't.
You know, it's not really disappointing because there's so many movies out there. It's hard to really sit down and watch, you know, even if you're like, okay, I'm going to watch every Robert Redford movie that's out there.
Right.
I haven't seen every Robert Redford movie out there.
He was very prolific.
Hard. Very prolific, yes. How about you, Ken?
Oh, we were supposed to watch this movie?
Oh.
Anyway, same as Ted. I watched it basically a few days after you told us that this was going to be the movie that we were going to do. I rented it from the library and watched it a few times. I'm not saying I'm not disappointed that I waited this long, but I will say that I think watching this probably in 1972, which granted I would have just been born, it was different than watching it in 2021 for the first time. There's something different about this movie. I think it appeals more to that generation maybe than to this generation now.
Oh, in 1972, Western movies were still extremely popular.
Well, not just Western movies, but you had things like The Wilderness Family and Swiss Family Robinson.
Right.
You still had all these type of like outdoorsy movies that people really enjoyed.
Little House on the Prairie.
And Disney would show these as kind of like their movie of the week.
The Wonderful World of Disney on Sunday nights. Yeah, they would show like the Davy Crockett. The one that I always remember because I grew up on the Mississippi was Davy Crockett and the Mississippi Pirates or whatever. And he had to build a...
Was Johnny Depp in that movie?
Yeah, no. Unfortunately not. It was...
Didn't they open for Guns N' Roses in the late 80s?
Yes, they actually did.
Okay. Yeah.
That's a blast from the past, Ken. Wow. I think you're right, though, Ken. I think that this movie is not necessarily a movie that would have appealed to the people of our generation while we were growing up, because it is different. But I think that now that I've passed 40, I think I can look and say that I actually appreciate the movie now than I would have probably even 10 years ago.
That is true. This is a rare movie that I can actually specifically remember when and where I was when I saw this movie for the first time. I was actually living in Aurora. I had a roommate, just moved back from Denver. We had an apartment, and we were just, watching movies here and there, and he brought up the movie Jeremiah Johnson, which turned out to be his favorite movie of all time, I found out. And he's like, "You've never seen it?" I was like, "No, I've never seen it." So he's like, "Well, we got to watch it," and he had a copy of it. This is probably 2002, 2001, somewhere in that ballpark. And I remember sitting down and watching this movie, and I remember saying to myself, "What do you see in this movie?" And I asked him that, and he's like, "Well, first off, it's a hunting movie." He's a big hunter. He was a huge hunting nut, and he just loved all the hunting stuff, and he loved the outdoor scenes, and he loved the wilderness, and apparently he's a big Robert Redford fan, too, which I was also, but I'd never seen this. And I remember watching this movie for the first time and just going, it's a little slow, not my thing, not a real big Western person, and we called it a day. And then since then, I've probably seen it maybe a handful of times, 6, 7 times, and I always look at it with obviously a different set of eyes. We'll go into that with more detail when we review the movie.
So, Eric, why did you pick this movie out of the rest of the Pollack movies that you could have picked?
It was tough, I'll be honest with you. I was really up between this movie and Out of Africa. Out of Africa obviously won the Academy Award for Best Movie, Best Film in 1984. Again, another Robert Redford movie. We all know the relationship between Redford and Sydney Pollack. I honestly don't have a real reason why I picked this movie. I wanted something a little different than a typical Sydney Pollack movie that we'd watched before. And this one kind of went on, obviously, his earlier work, kind of a different tangent. Earlier work with Robert Redford, and I thought it'd be more interesting to talk about. Out of Africa is a great movie, too. It's also pushing 3 hours. It's got different watchability issues, obviously. The cinematography in that one is also breathtaking. And it's got, obviously, Meryl Streep in it, one of my favorite actresses of all time. But I wanted just to kind of go a little different tangent on it, and that was really about it. It wasn't like, oh, we're doing this movie hands down. I was really kind of toiling with this one with Out of Africa.
We were talking about the cinematography in both those movies, Out of Africa and this one, and I think, if anything, when it comes down to my review, the one thing I definitely will say is it's beautifully shot. This is just a beautiful movie, and I only got to watch it on DVD, and it was still impressive.
A lot of your Western movies of the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and then forth were all shot in Utah. A lot of national parks. This was shot at Zion National Park, which is in the southern part of the state. So you have more of your wide open, not as many trees. It's more of the painted rocks area of the southern U.S., which can mimic New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado. Right. And then it was shot on a lot of his property. He had several thousand acres there, obviously, which helped with some of the shooting costs. A lot of this was shot in the Wasatch Mountain Range, which is heavily in the higher mountain ranges. It has a lot of pine trees, where it's going to be your grizzlies, is going to be your heavy snow scenes. The nice thing about shooting in the state of Utah, for a Western movie especially, is you have everything you need is self-contained for all parts of any type of Western movie you need. Whether you need open desert, whether you need 5 feet of snow and tracking, it's got everything you need.
And when you're saying on the property, it's Robert Redford's property.
Robert Redford's personal property was used in a lot of this, yes.
My understanding that Robert Redford is actually a huge outdoorsman.
Oh, yeah.
And you wouldn't take it by watching the movies that he does, but he's really into that. And he even says that this is like a very personal film for him. Like it's his favorite film that he's ever made.
I had read that as well. I mean, this is one of his, I hate to use the pet project type line, but this is definitely one of his pet projects. And what you had described, Eric, is the different landscapes that Utah allows really fits the story a lot better. And the story of Jeremiah Johnson is pretty interesting as well. I had read the actual Jeremiah Johnson was disinterred from his grave in Los Angeles, and Robert Redford paid to have him interred in Wyoming, close to part of his ranch. And there's a big statue now in Casper, Wyoming, of Jeremiah Johnson. So Jeremiah Johnson was a real guy.
Right. In fact, he was named John Jeremiah Johnston.
Yeah.
You know, and we'll talk about this further here, but when he did kill these Indians, he would eat their liver.
He was called Liver Eater Johnson. But like with a lot of guys of that era who were quite famous, like Kit Carson and Davy Crockett, there's a lot of myth of Jeremiah Johnston as well.
Yeah, I bet there's a lot of tall tale there.
What happened was he did leave the mountains, and he came down, and he ended up becoming part of, I don't know if it was Buffalo Bill Cody's Wild West show, but he was part of a traveling Wild West show. I think he did part of a tour with Annie Oakley. He was always known to, how to put this kindly, embellish his persona and the stories around him. So there's a lot of unknown about exactly what exactly is true and what exactly isn't. To make things as interesting as possible for these Wild West shows, people had to be larger than life. There was a couple of people who put together a lot of these stories, and that's what Ken had mentioned in the particulars about the book Crow Killer. And essentially the authors of that book have just kind of left it up to the reader to decide what is tall tale and what is true. The Native Americans of that area knew him and stayed away from him.
And there's a lot of changes from the books and the screenplay. Even the screenplay was very more violent and gory. Pollack and Redford had decided they wanted to go a little bit different direction and make him look more like a great guy, you know,
a sympathetic figure.
Exactly.
One of the questions that you wanted to touch on, Eric, the people who were originally tied to this movie were Sam Peckinpah to direct and Lee Marvin. That's even before Clint Eastwood was attached to the movie. I like Sam Peckinpah. I think he makes good movies. The Wild Bunch is my favorite Western movie. If Sam Peckinpah and Lee Marvin got a hold of this, we have an entirely different movie.
Oh, it would definitely be more like the Wild Bunch. And I honestly think with Lee Marvin, I think it'd probably be a little bit more violent too.
You took the words right out of my mouth.
Yep.
This is going to end up being like Dirty Harry or the Charles Bronson movie,
Death Wish.
Death Wish. Yes, it's going to be more Death Wish and Wild Bunch than sympathetic Jeremiah Johnson's family gets killed, and that's why he goes off and starts murdering Indians.
I can see Clint Eastwood being very similar, though, to Robert Redford. I was thinking about all the other movies that Clint Eastwood has done, like the no-name character.
Right.
And I could see him being very much like how Robert Redford portrayed this. Maybe a little bit more violent, and maybe a little bit more believable as far as I'm going to be able to kill all these Indians. Nothing against Robert Redford. I think Robert Redford does a great job, and it could be one of his best acting performances, period. He has to shoulder the lengths of this movie because it's all about him. And, of course, the mountains.
He did a lot of the stunt scenes himself, too.
Yes.
I agree with you, Ken, with the Clint Eastwood thing. I think you can see a progression of how the movie moved to a more family-friendly Jeremiah Johnson than Sam Peckinpah and Lee Marvin. That in between with Clint Eastwood, if he directs it himself, it's going to be more like the Outlaw Josie Wales. And movies that he directed like that was it The Pale Horse?
Pale Rider.
Pale Rider. Those are Clint Eastwood directed vehicles that were westerns, which he took a lot of that from Sergio Leone because he played the man with no name characters in that brilliant trilogy. I also think that the movie would have been as visually stunning had Clint Eastwood directed it as well, because of what Clint Eastwood learned from Sergio Leone in shooting those spaghetti westerns in Italy. To start off with Sam Peckinpah and Lee Marvin, all of a sudden it's a whole new ballgame. That's a violent movie. We'll put it that way.
The dirty one. The dirty one. Instead of the dirtiest.
Exactly. I mean,
it'd be Jeremiah Johnson, Crow Killer or something.
It would have been. It probably would have been Crow Killer. I mean, that's a different movie, and it still would kind of be interesting. But it's not the movie we're talking about. We'll put it that way.
You know, we're talking about performances. Robert Redford, I do see an interesting progression in the character that he portrays. He comes off the boat, and I'm thinking that this character is running away from that Mexican war. I think he's AWOL. I think he ran away because he's in his uniform still. And then he comes in there and he wants to buy a certain type of gun. Was it like a 30 caliber or,
he wanted 50 caliber.
He wanted the 50 caliber Hawkins.
It shows how he wasn't ready to really be a mountain man at the beginning. He's doing a lot of things incorrectly. He's trying to build a fire under the trees with the snow, and the snow falls right on the fire. But the one thing that I wanted to find out that I'm a little disappointed here, the progression of the character is cool, but I wanted to know why he wanted to become a mountain man. Is it because he was running away? Is that the only reason? What made him decide to become a mountain man? I read stuff about the books itself and read about the character was kind of an abused child, but we don't get any real sense of why he's chosen this lifestyle, and I would have loved to have seen something to kind of point me into that direction of why he's doing this. Why isn't he just going back to town when things are bad? Where's the motivation for him to be a mountain man?
Well, this would be one of my criticisms with the story. I agree with you, Ken. There should have been a little bit more detail. The movie starts off with the narrator. I love the use of a narrator for setting a stage. And the narrator here sets a stage. But he doesn't go far enough and tell us that he had left the Mexican-American War because of disagreements with war in general. And he's left to become a mountain man. And essentially, like you said, it can go AWOL. So we don't have that motivation of why he's going off into the mountains. It just seems rather random that a person would just all of a sudden up and go to the mountains. There has to be a motivation to drive that. And if you're going to use the narrator, fill in some of these blanks that leaves these open places. The other criticism I have is I never knew what time frame we were living in. When he first meets the first man that he comes across, he says that the area was hunted out between 20 and 25. I had no idea that we were talking 1820. We don't get a real good idea of what time frame we're dealing with until he asks the cavalrymen about the Mexican-American War. And then we kind of realize a lot of time has passed, one. And two, are we in the midst of the Civil War? or right after the Civil War. So that's how I was able to gauge what time frame we were dealing with. You have to be kind of a dork, like I am as far as history goes, to know the time frame of the guns that he was using, the Hawkins percussion. Those are distinctly post-War of 1812 America, but pre-Civil War America, because after the Civil War, the Sharps repeater and the Winchester became the guns that essentially tamed the West. It's very odd how everything kind of fits together there for me.
I think it was done on purpose that way, specifically not going into details about dates and wars and kind of leaving it open, because I think it kind of tails into the last scene of the movie where he asks, hey, do you know what month it is? It's kind of done specifically to make it so you're not really paying attention to the specific time period or era. You're paying more attention to the scenery, the background, the characters. The character himself has lost track of time and doesn't even really know where he is, when it is. He's just there. And Dell says the same thing. I really don't know what month it is. And I think the whole true character of a mountain man is, hey, you don't need to know details of, day, month, year, time. You just go by the way the arrow flies and the scars and the light and everything around you, and you just live one day at a time.
I think it does make it better to know than the time frame when the movie starts because of that question that he asked, what month is it? Because of all the things that he's gone through, he does forget the time. And it's good, I think, to have a starting place for not just him, but for us to kind of relate. And then on top of what Ted was saying, as far as why he's a mountain man, maybe it is because he was done with war. I mean, Ted was mentioning that he had disagreements, and maybe he decided to become a mountain man because when you're a mountain man, you're not dealing with the politics of war. And granted, he gets himself into his own little war with the Indians and ends up killing anyway. So no matter what, I think his character ends up doing exactly what he was trying to get away from. And maybe even at the end there, he's maybe a little disappointed with how things turned out, even though there's that question that Bearclaw asked him about, do you regret doing this? And he's like, regret what? But at the same time, he's lost a lot. I don't know. Sometimes I think it's a little uneven with his character because he's very happy when he has the family. Probably the happiest he ever is in the whole movie, at least from what we see.
Clearly.
I mean, I don't see a joy in him to be a mountain man. It's when he has a family that it seems like that things have changed for him.
Well, I think that's why his opinion of Dell changes as well. I don't want to say that Dell knew that that's what was going to help him get through everything, but Dell kind of sets up the whole idea that he's going to get a wife. I will say this in response, Eric, to what you were saying about the whole time and everything like that. The first time watching it through, I did get kind of stuck trying to figure out, okay, he's using a Hawkins. Why isn't he using a Sharps repeater or something of that nature? That's just me being hypercritical. That's what I do, is I try to place things in a time frame. His interactions with the Native Americans in the movie is going to change if we're post-Civil War, because that's when the American government is going to try to. And we do kind of see that with the preacher and the cavalry, where they talk about, well, this is the Republic of, what did they say, the Republic of Colorado.
Republic of Colorado. Yeah.
Okay, so Colorado's not even a state yet. But this is about the time after the Civil Wars when the government's going to start to move these Native Americans off of their land. I guess what I was trying to do is predict where the movie was going to go, because it doesn't ever deal with the fact that the government's going to move Native Americans off of the land. I'm going to say this right off. I like Dances with Wolves, but I like Jeremiah Johnson better because Jeremiah Johnson, it doesn't deal with the white savior, where the white guy comes in and saves the Native Americans. It shows him that he's coexisting with them. They are violent with each other. It's a very honest movie in that way, and I really appreciate that.
For two different periods of time. That's a Civil War period, after Civil War period.
That's an 1870s type of movie.
Right.
The Native Americans are in direct conflict with the
United States government.
With the American government. Yeah, that's where I was trying to see how this would fit, to see if we're going to go there. And we never go there. I really appreciate that.
I mean, the book and the movie are a little different about why he goes to war with the Indians. From my understanding, it's not trespassing on a burial ground. I guess I'd never really found out exactly why the Indians decided to go after him. And I don't know if he actually had a wife who was a Native American. Do you know anything about that, Ted?
These are all part of the tall tales. The truth is never really known as far as to what exactly caused him to have a conflict with the Crow. We do know that the Blackfoot tribe, they were a warring tribe. They were not a peaceful tribe. Somebody could probably disagree with this or maybe tell me the truth. I believe that the Crow were part of the Sioux Nation. When provoked, they can be violent. There's a few different reasons as to why they would have attacked him. One, he was hunting on their land, and they just got tired of it, because we do go see him hunt buffalo. And buffalo were sacred, especially the Plains Indians. And even though this is Colorado in the Rocky Mountains, that's still part of the Plains Indian identity. That's where they would go during the wintertime. You see that in Dances with Wolves. They go up to the mountains during the wintertime. That's a definite possibility. Or they could have just been tired of him on their land. They make Jeremiah Johnson out to be this kind of nice guy where he kind of gets along with everybody until provoked. The truth is kind of a little bit muddier than that. These mountain guys, while they have a healthy respect for the Native Americans, they're not buddies. They're seen as invaders. But see, that's not to every tribe, because you see the Flatheads had been Christianized. And they're a peaceful tribe. It's hard to say. It's part of the mythology that's grown around not only Jeremiah Johnson, but like I said, Kit Carson and all of these guys, even to a certain extent, Lewis and Clark.
It's very interesting to watch the Flatheads do their Christian stuff, like in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and they pray before their dinner and they pray before they go to bed. I was listening to something that said if Jeremiah Johnson had to deal with the Apache, they wouldn't send one at a time. They would send a bunch of people out to kill him.
If this was what we now consider like a state and a half lower and dealing with the Apache, they would have just up and murdered him. I mean, you're talking...
Yeah, they wouldn't have messed around with this. We're going to send one at a time.
One at a time, which makes for a great movie, too.
Is it a little cheesy, though, at the end, with the salute of respect?
Not necessarily, because that would have been designed to show that not only was there respect, but that it was over. The Native Americans were done at that point. It's a different culture that does things differently than us. In some ways, it's a beautiful culture. Of everything that happened, that's probably the most believable. However, I think it probably would have went down a little bit different, where they would have had some sort of a sit-down.
Hey, all these attacks on him, and I see him getting stabbed and...
Got a hatchet in the back.
Hatchet back. And how...
Survivor, isn't he?
Not only does he survive, it's like the next scene, he's like perfectly fine.
Yeah.
He doesn't have any like limp. He isn't nursing any type of injury. I was just like, wait a second. Especially the one where he gets shot off his horse.
Right.
Yeah.
And then he's waiting for the Indian to come closer so he can shoot him. But then he gets a spear right in the gut.
The spear.
Right.
That's the one that I don't get at all. Dude, he would have been hurting for certain.
Who would have patched him up? Did he have his own spear survivor kit where he brings something out and stitches himself up? That part doesn't make any sense to me because of the fact that he should have been dead. He should have bled out or gotten the infection like Eric just said.
Yeah.
The fact that he's just perfectly fine in the next scene drives me nuts. And that's not the only scene, like you're talking about the hatchet in the back.
Hatchet in the back, yeah.
He falls down, but then the next scene, he's perfectly fine.
Right. Yeah.
I would like to see maybe somebody came along and helped take care of him or something to the extent to tell me how he was able to survive this. I thought he was dead. I thought after he took that spear, this is the end of the movie.
I did too. And ironically, where he's speared is right by the liver. There's no way it could have missed the liver. I completely agree with you, Ken. It's one of the more fantastical parts of the movie is all of the fight scenes because we don't see the aftermath. The bottom line is what should have ensued from that spear, it should have been equivalent to Mr. Orange's character in Reservoir Dogs. He should have been a puddle of blood. I mean, he took a gut shot with a spear. So yeah, it's a little fantastical.
Doesn't Dell get hit by a spear too? And he seems perfectly fine.
Yeah, that's right. They're sitting by the tree. He gets hit by the spear. Johnson kills the guy, and then they go back to drinking coffee.
Right.
So where were we?
Yeah, It's like, hey, did you see the game last night? I mean,
Yeah, I forgot about that scene. You're right.
yeah, I mean, he's perfectly fine right there and then.
Yeah.
It's not like we go to the next scene and he's perfectly fine. He's okay right there in the same scene, and then he gets on the horse and they go their separate ways. Some of this stuff just doesn't make sense to me.
It makes it hard to believe that he was in a fight for his life.
I think the Dell character is kind of a weird character in itself. When he meets him, he's like buried up into his neck. By the way, he makes a joke about the Mormons doing it.
Yeah.
But the Mormon religion wasn't even invented by that particular time yet. So.
It was invented. They hadn't made it out to Utah, though, yet. Well, I think here again, this depends on the time frame. Because Mormonism had made it. If we're talking that this is pre-Civil War, some of them would have made it as far out west as Colorado. But the majority of them were located in Missouri at this point.
Are they still in Nauvoo at that point?
I think so, and that's kind of ironic that I wouldn't know that exactly, considering I grew up 45 minutes away from Nauvoo. The Mormon faith, when they broke up, there was some in Nauvoo, there were some in Missouri, and then some of them did make it out to Colorado. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that they would have been out there, but the vast majority of them were not.
And how would he even know who the Mormons were if he was a mountain man?
It was just a little fun joke, kind of, because of all the people that would do it. The Mormons?
We don't actually know what denomination the preacher is that's with the Calvary.
True.
All we know is he's a jerk.
Based off of the Mormons' relationship with the American government, I would tend to lead that it probably was not a Mormon, because they had their dealings with the federal government as well, which were not kind, and they weren't on a real good basis. It probably wasn't, but it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility, based off of just the movie, that he could have been a Mormon.
Dell, we see him buried. I've never seen a movie or heard an Indian tribe burying a man.
Oh, yeah.
It is something that happens? Yeah. Okay. And then he gets him unburied, and then they go try to get his horses, and then, of course, he ends up killing those Indians once the horse makes a sound, even though they seem to be still perfectly sleeping. And then Jeremiah Johnson was very upset about possibly getting killed, but he still hangs out with this guy. I mean, at this particular time, I think this guy is kind of shady.
Yeah, because doesn't he put the scalps on Jeremiah's horse to set him up, because he doesn't know what kind of Indian tribe they're approaching?
Exactly. No, he's covering his own backside. What they would do when they would bury somebody up to their neck like that is generally they would put honey or something on their head.
Attract ants.
Yeah, fire ants. Well, you see, I believe there's a couple of scorpions running around by his head, too.
There are definitely scorpions in that part of the country.
Yeah, that's if they really wanted to mess you up. They didn't want you to die quick.
I would like to know a little bit more why he knew. Is he French? How does he know the French language
he's
himself?
French. His last name is G-U-E.
Could it be Guy or Guy?
Guy or Guy or Goo.
Yeah. Goo.
His family was probably trappers in that area, because that was French at that point. Flathead, they were Christianized by French missionaries because they speak French. The Spanish missionaries didn't reach up that far.
But he talks to them in English for the most part. He doesn't talk to them in French. When he congratulates them on the wedding, he congratulates them in English. It's like his French is so-so.
I never thought that the chief was really fully Indian. He had a French look about himself. So by that point, they probably all would have intermingled. And by then, there would have been enough travelers and trappers out there that some of the Native Americans would have already learned English. Because Bear Claw, doesn't he say that the Crow chief speaks English, but he only speaks French to tick him off?
Yeah, something like that.
A lot of them, especially the ones that were Christianized, they caught on to the English language relatively quickly.
Well, the interesting thing about the wedding there was the song they're playing. I found out that they used the wrong song. The type of song that they ended up playing is one used for funerals, not for weddings. So that was a little bit of a goof. At least they used real Native Americans instead of other films who like to use white actors and make them look like.
Yes, which is what Mel Brooks made fun of in Blazing Saddles. People don't think of Blazing Saddles making a political statement, but that was Mel Brooks's political statement to Hollywood to stop using white actors as Native Americans.
What are your thoughts about the progression relationship with the son and his wife?
I think it's one of the most human parts of the story. He comes upon this tragedy that's happened, and we don't exactly know why she was spared, because those native tribes probably would not have left anybody. But some of them left to leave witness as to what happened, to scare further white people away. He's right in that they probably wouldn't have bothered her anymore because they would have been terrified. He can no longer function. And I think that's the most human part of Jeremiah that we get to see, is him taking in Caleb and his relationship with him, and how they develop a father-son type of relationship, and they've figured out their own way to communicate. I think that's one of the most amazing parts of the movie.
I think it's interesting when the cavalry comes up and speaks to him, and he kind of looks stymied, and they're like, "You speak English, Johnson?" And he's like, "Oh, I haven't heard anyone speak English in so long." And even his English was kind of broken, and word for word, it wasn't flowing naturally, which I think was interesting, just to say that he's been isolated so long, and he's learning I assume the language of the Flathead to communicate with his wife. It was very interesting how things have kind of turned.
Yeah.
I love the relationship here with him and how it doesn't automatically become a relationship at first between him and the wife. And it gradually, granted, he does look under the blanket to see what kind of body she has. And he was like, ooh. But this is my favorite part, is their relationship and the building of it. It actually was very heartbroken to see them having to be killed off and then him getting revenge. But after that, there's like no acknowledgement that they really existed. Even when like Dell asked him about them, he doesn't really say anything about it. He doesn't talk about them at all, almost to the point like it never happened. Like he's moving on. And in fact, even at the end, Bearclaw says, was it worth it? To a certain extent, he's like, yeah. Still being the mountain man was still more important than what had happened in the past. And I thought that was kind of, for me, icky at the end.
I don't know about that. I kind of like the way he summarized it. I mean, I think it's very self-aware. He had an amazing life when he was up there. I mean, he found what turned into love. He had a family, but he also lived the mountain man lifestyle. I think that he realizes that he wouldn't have wanted to go back and not have it be done.
I would have loved to have seen a little bit more of him say something about losing the child and losing the wife. Like, that is something that really is bothering him. But still have that, I would still choose this life. When Dell talks about him, he talks to them like they're still alive almost to a certain extent. They don't mention what the Indians did to them. I don't know, it's kind of weird. But the relationship itself, them playing games, her chin is kind of
scratchy.
A little red, scratchy because of his beard. And then he goes and shaves it off. And when he comes back, she looks like him like, who are you? Why did you shave off that beard? Almost like to the extent that you're not very attractive with that beard off is kind of the look that she gave him.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the actress who plays Swan, his wife, this is really the only movie role that she ever
does. Yeah,
she doesn't really move on to do anything. I hear that she was in one of the shows that I like, Monk, in a number of episodes, but to be honest with you, I would have, if I didn't read about that, I would have not even known. And most of this cast, their faces there that I see, and I wouldn't be able to tell you their names.
Right.
But I see them pop up in all these other type of movies of the 60s and 70s during that time frame. Going back to the Reverend, played by Paul Benedict. I believe he was also the neighbor of the Jeffersons. And
played a revolutionary role in that TV show.
He is a total jerk. He's supposed to be a man of the cloth, but you could tell
no respect for the Native Americans.
It does seem like the lieutenant does. He's being more diplomatic. You would think it'd be the other way around.
Right.
But in this particular case, it seems like the lieutenant is more like, we don't want to be messing with these Indians who are watching us. And that's the other thing I was wondering, why did he went through the burial ground when they were saying at all this time we're being watched?
For the sake of the story, it does, because they believed that they were above the Native Americans to begin with, and so there wouldn't have been any respect for their burial ground. The way I took it with the lieutenant was that there's a good possibility he had been stationed out there long enough to gain a mutual respect for the Native Americans, but he also is torn because he has a sense of duty that he has to do to this Reverend, whoever he is, that he's supposed to serve the American government too. And so he's kind of torn. So I see why they would have been torn. I think the reason that the Crow took retribution on Jeremiah Johnson is because he should have known better, and he should not have went into the burial ground because he knew what it meant, because they helped him establish himself. So there was no animosity there. What I thought was going to happen, and the way other Westerns would have definitely went, would have been that we would have seen the Crow kill that entire party of settlers that were trapped. They're lucky that they hadn't run into a war party of Blackfoot warriors.
I don't like when they say what would happen. He's like, I don't know. I think that's too ignorant on his part, considering the relationships that he has, and that the fact that he knows not to go through it, he says not to. You know, if something bad's going to happen, we may be killed, we may be slaughtered. Not, I don't know. I know it's a movie, but I'm playing this off like real life. I don't know how long what did he say, like 20 miles? How long 20 miles would be? It'd probably be a couple-day ride.
Probably.
Think.
Yeah, a 2-day ride maybe, give or take.
Yeah, and they would be dead. And I understand his concern, but if they're watching him, and he knows that they're watching them, and we don't even know, maybe, because we don't see this military party after they find the settlers, we don't know if they get wiped out as well.
Never.
It's wide open.
Who's leading them back? Jeremiah Johnson has just left. How are you going to get back from where you're at now all the way back? Because Jeremiah Johnson actually tells them they're not going to survive getting there without him going through that direction. How are they going to do it coming back? Because they have to come, I would imagine, come back the same way, right?
Maybe. I think the lieutenant in the cavalry would have known if there was a different route that they could have taken back that would have been easier.
Or maybe they would have taken the route the settlers were originally going. Who knows?
Right. And they could have continued on, and then the cavalry could have circled back, and they could have avoided the burial ground in that case, which I think that particular lieutenant probably would have. Most wouldn't have. Let's face it, that's why George Custer was killed. Even though he had a good relationship with some of the Native Americans, that's why he was killed in the way he was.
You would figure they would know a way to get there because somebody had to come and let them know that the settlement needed them.
There was a wagon train that was broke down.
And were they just left behind and then they came back from later?
Somebody had to go to town. It's really difficult because here again, not knowing a time frame, how that mechanism would have all worked. Somebody would have had to have broken off, went back to town, or this also happened especially if you were on the Oregon Trail. If you didn't show up at the next fort or outpost in the correct amount of time, they gave you about 5 or 6 days before they would send out a search party for you.
That sounds probably more
realistic.
Happened.
There's a host of different things that could have happened there. I was just shocked the fact that they didn't all get slaughtered by the Native Americans.
Or at least had that fight, and then maybe you have some people that survived, or he survives, or whatever the case may be. But yeah, I would have rather seen that. But what happens after that?
Yeah, different movie. That's in the Sam Peckinpah version.
Yeah, right.
This is where not having a time frame makes it difficult, because you don't know exactly how to connect what's going on.
I mean, it is a movie. Let's be honest. It's not factually based, clearly.
It's hard to say that this is factually based when the facts of the real man are essentially lost to history, because nobody really knows if he told the truth. I didn't read that this happened, but a big thing in the late 1800s, when these Wild West shows were huge, was pulp novels, where there would be small novelizations of these mountain characters that were real people. They would write these novels that were accessible to the average person, so they would only be like 5 cents. They would tell these tall tales of all these different settlers. I would imagine someone wrote one about him too. So you don't really know what the truth is, unfortunately.
And plus there are changes in this movie that are not from the book or from probably the tales as well. And we already talked about the sacred burial ground. That's why his boy got killed. But nobody knows for sure why that happens. In fact, the only reason why he finds out who killed them, the rifle that he gave his wife, and she was pregnant at the time in real life. The gun that he gave her was on a Crow Indian, and so that's why he decided to attack those Crow Indians, because he knew they must have done it because they have the gun. Because it's specific, I think it was a Tennessee rifle or something like that was used. So this movie changes a lot of things, because we want a sympathetic character. Reading things about the true character, he might not be that sympathetic.
One of the other things that came out of this movie was a real big movement into people wanting to go back and use black powder weapons to hunt with those out west. That was out of this particular movie that sparked a renewed interest into the Hawkins rifle. I actually had to do some research because one of the things in the movie that kind of got me the first time I was watching it was the fact that he was able to use that 50 caliber Hawkins and he was able to shoot from long distances. This is where time frame got me. Too, what I found out was the Hawkins rifle was an adaptation of the old Tennessee long rifle, which was not barreled, meaning that it shot out the mini ball straight out and there was no barreling. What that means is it was inaccurate, especially long distances. Well, what they found out is that if you put grooves on the inside of a barrel, it caused a centrifugal spin to keep the bullet more accurate. Well, the Hawkins took the Tennessee long rifle and they barreled it, and that's why he's able to shoot from hundreds of yards and able to knock down the buffalo and the elk.
Yeah, but most people watching this movie have no knowledge of that, or really, it doesn't even really play a factor in this movie. To the common person who has no gun knowledge watching this movie or any movie, a gun's a gun, and you just take it as a grain of salt that someone's hunting a gun and hunting an animal in the 1800s, and boom, hey, you got it.
They did show like what the difference between having a 30 and a 50 caliber
was.
the
50 knocked him on his ass.
He totally missed with the 30. But later when he gets the 50, he's all of a sudden this amazing shooter. So they are trying to show, they're trying to show the difference between the guns. We haven't touched on the character Big Bear. Is it
Big Bear?
He's probably one of my favorite characters in this movie because, well, there's not that many characters, but he gives a little bit of a change of pace, especially when it comes to skinning the bear, the grizzly. And he runs into his home. So he's like, skin this, Pilgrim, and he runs into the house. Jeremiah Johnson's like, what the heck's going on? And he ends up having to kill the bear in the house. I heard that took 2 weeks to accomplish that because it was really hard to get the bear to follow the path into the cabin.
Oh, I'm sure.
So but I like his character. I would have liked to seen a little bit more of that character. In fact, at the end, I would have liked to seen a little bit more of a conversation. And you guys might find this conversation at the end just fine. These two had a close relationship. He taught him everything he knew. And they were like far away from each other like it was the plague. It was almost like it was maybe a dream. Maybe he was seeing him in this dream or something that he's so far away. Or maybe he's distancing himself from him because he doesn't want to get a spear in his leg.
Maybe.
I like the relationship I see. I wish I would have seen more, and kind of like a bookended at the end, maybe where he's coming up and Jeremiah Johnson tells him to put the gun down, just like a bookend of how they first met. That's the only thing I would have liked to seen probably a little bit more is that relationship at the end. Mm-hmm. It was like 2 minutes long, and that was it.
I agree. I would have definitely liked to seen. Those are clearly your two main characters. I mean, that and Dell, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I would have liked to definitely seen. We kind of saw the relationship with him and Dell, how that kind of blossomed and how that moved. But yeah, we didn't really see much with Bear Claw there.
And I would rather have seen that relationship with Bear Claw than I would have wanted to seen it with Dell, because I think that's the better relationship.
Especially at the end. I think you could have definitely gone a little bit more in their final meetup of, hey, what's been going on? You know, a little bit more detail, especially in how Jeremiah's character was handling stuff over the past, well, we don't know, months, years, it's open, but just kind of a little bit more insight to both characters' progression of what's been going on, kind of like a wrap-up of everything. I would have liked to seen that.
Yeah, we just don't know the time frame that's passed. It could be just years. It might not be 10, 15, 20 years. It could just be 3 years. You don't know because you have that period of when he's married and has the child, not much time has passed there. But then again, he doesn't know how to speak his own language by the time they meet him. I think it'd be nice to have an idea of the time for us to kind of judge a little bit better. I understand maybe it doesn't need it for him, but for us as the viewers, and this goes back to your narrator, Ted, at the beginning, maybe have that narrator pop up from time to time. Give us a little bit more info. We don't need a lot, just a little bit here and there. If you brought in a narrator at the beginning, you could have the narrator show up throughout the movie.
Well, this is kind of what I had thought. And I think, Ken, you had brought up the fact that you didn't like the last line, well, we don't really know if he's still up there or not. What would lead me to believe that he's not, after he'd made peace with the Crow, he was trying to make his transition back to town. it seems like the story arcs. You travel the story, and he meets these people along the way. He meets Bear Claw, then he meets the crazy lady who had watched her whole family get killed. And then he met Del Gu. As things circled back, as the movie's ending, he hits each one of those things in reverse succession. He meets Del coming back down the mountain, and makes peace and catches up with him. He then runs into the homestead where the lady had been killed, and then sees the crow had made the homages to him at that place that they knew that he had taken Caleb from. And then he meets Bearclaw at the end, and that's kind of the end of the movie. And it's like the arc had went full circle, and that's why I thought it's essentially transitioning back to civilization again.
It's very Clockwork Orange-like.
A little bit.
The first half, and then the second half is kind of in reverse, like Clockwork Orange a little bit.
Right, where he meets the people that he had met along the way, and kind of wraps up their story. But I agree with you about the narrator as well, because just having that narrator pop in from time to time, one, it would have made the montage sequences a lot more palatable. I'm still not a fan of the montage sequences.
The sequences are fine, I think. I think it's the music that's along with it.
We never really mentioned the overture or the intermission either.
Oh, well, if we want to go there, just let me start here real quick as far as the narrator is one of the guys and who sings the song about Jeremiah Johnson. In my opinion, that's probably the biggest missed opportunity of the entire movie. Why they didn't go and contact Johnny Cash or Waylon Jennings. Waylon Jennings did really well being the narrator for the Duke brothers in The Dukes of Hazzard. Or they didn't catch up with somebody like Merle Haggard or Chris Christopherson for that matter.
Well, there was a limited budget on this.
Yeah.
$4 million.
I know, but they weren't unattainable, especially at that point, where country music had shifted away from their type of country music. Why they didn't have somebody famous do that and then sing the song, that, in my opinion, is one of the biggest missed opportunities in the movie.
Yeah, it would work for both sides of the story. Whoever was, let's say it was Johnny Cash or whoever it was, they could have put that song out as a single with the movie.
Right.
And they would have made money off of that. At this particular time, the idea of country western stars being in the movie was something exciting for them.
Look at Chris Christopherson, or was A Star Is Born later than 70?
Star Is Born 76.
Okay, so it would have been after.
4 years.
But he would have been making music at this time.
Oh, clearly. Oh, yeah.
So I don't understand why that opportunity was missed. The music of this movie is what sets this apart from being an epic movie, because you have these vistas. And I think this is where Tarantino did really well with The Hateful Eight, where he brought in Ennio Morricone to come in and do the score for The Hateful Eight. And I'm not saying that Sydney Pollack should have brought in Morricone, but if he would have had somebody who would have been able to put a really good score behind this movie, I think you're borderlining on an epic movie. One of those movies that, wow, this is an amazing movie that everybody needs to see. And as far as the overture goes, here again, my criticism is with the music. Why would I need an overture? I mean, this isn't Dr. Zhivago.
Yeah, this isn't 4 hours long. Why do you even need an overture?
Exactly.
Or an intermission.
Or an intermission.
The intermission comes at the weirdest time in the movie. There's almost a half an hour of the movie left. One, I don't need an intermission for a 2-hour movie. I mean, let's be perfectly honest. But the cut of that comes at the most awkward place because it's right about the time that he finds out his family's dead. It's just an awkward placement of that breaks the transition.
Isn't it before they go into the burial ground?
I think it's right after, isn't it?
I think it's right before. It's still not needed. Plus, it's not even a 2-hour movie. If you take those two things out, it's an hour and 40-minute movie. Closer to being a 90-minute flick than a 2-hour flick, and you're putting all this in. And this isn't played out like a play.
There's not like 3 main acts or something that you're trying to break up. When I watched it recently, just for the first time, when I flipped it in, it starts right at the overture. I'm like, oh, do I have the wrong side on? Or why is there an overture? I was so confused.
The VHS copy of this actually took that and the intermission out.
Yep.
Did they? Okay.
Yes.
Yep. And, I'm usually a fan of having an overture. Because when I think of having an overture, I think of an epic movie. I think of Dr. Zhivago or Lawrence of Arabia.
Lawrence of Arabia, definitely.
One of these soundtracks that's is one of those iconic soundtracks of all time where you're sitting there and you're like, yes, this is what orchestration in movies was all about. And it's like, I'll be perfectly honest, I had to fast forward through the overture. I wasn't a fan of the music. And this is a criticism that we found in almost every one of Sydney Pollack's films. For some reason, he just can't nail the music aspect of it. And I know that, Eric, you have this love for Go Tootsie Go.
Go Tootsie Go.
Instead of elevating this movie, the score just added really nothing to it. And like I said, the biggest missed opportunity is getting one of those country stars to come on and do the narrator and then sing the song. Just having that narrator pop in from time to time, Caleb and Swan have a connection and make a breakthrough. And the next scene we move to, we know there's a time jump because she's starting to speak a little bit of English. So we know that there had to have been a time jump because she's starting to learn things more. Just a little bit of connective tissue could have really have made the story a little bit tighter for me.
Talk about time jumps. There was no time, I guess, that went by when they took this trip to go help the settlement because Jeremiah Johnson's face is clean shaven until he gets coming back. And then he starts getting the 5 o'clock shadow. And I'm thinking, this took longer than a day for you to do all this. Again, one of the problems I have with this movie, I still think there's a lot of mistakes. Getting wounded and being okay in the next scene irks me. There's just so many things that just irk me. I think that just could have been done better.
The funniest things that came out of this movie is one of the most famous GIF. The GIF of Jeremiah Johnson looking back after he's caught one of the animals in the river, and he looks back over at his wife and kid, and he just shakes his head. That has become a GIF. And the funny thing about that is, the way his face is shaped with that beard, in my opinion, he looks just like Zach Galifianakis. And for the longest time when I saw that GIF, I thought it was a bit done by Zach Galifianakis, probably during one of his shows that he did Between Two Ferns or something. He did a skit and he had dressed up like that. Until somebody pointed it out that it was Robert Redford, I had no idea that GIF was of Robert Redford and Jeremiah Johnson.
I think you need to see the optometrist because I don't see it at all.
I don't see it at all, man. I'm sorry.
Ask anybody. Would dare you?
I just
my
asked
wife
Eric,
even
and Eric
thought,
just asked me, so we don't.
Yeah.
Agree.
My wife
see it,
even
ma'am.
thought that it was Zach Galifianakis.
Did not see it. Sorry.
But that's ironic.
And I just looked at it again. I just looked at it again while you were bringing it up, and I'm like, nope, I don't see it.
Now I see Robert Redford because now I know.
Okay, guys, we're at the tail end here. Let's wrap it up with what we really thought of this movie, and we'll kick it off with Ken.
Jeremiah Johnson is not a movie I dislike, but it's not a movie I like either. It falls into this area where I'm not sure what to think of it. There's a lot of problems with this movie. You have him getting hit by a spear and then surviving miraculously. It's like he's Wolverine or something like that, and he just regenerates all the time.
Nice.
Yeah. And the music, I agree with Ted, and I said it could have been improved with a narration. And I'm also a man that if you don't have a lot of action, then I like a lot of dialogue. And there's no dialogue in this movie either. I think it all depends on what your tastes are of where you're going to fall on this. I think it's one of the most beautifully shot movies. But after a while, I can only appreciate the scenery for what it is. It is beautiful. And we were joking at the beginning how it should probably get second billing. But if your second billing is your scenery, I think there's a problem there. Robert Redford does a great job here. I think it's one of his best performances. I really enjoy him. And in fact, doing Sydney Pollack movies, I've actually started to enjoy Robert Redford even more. I appreciate that we've done this director for Robert Redford's movies. I'm just going to get right down to it. This movie is a C. It's middle of the road. It's not bad. It's not good. I could make an argument that I could bump it up to C+, maybe, but there's just so much wasted opportunities in this movie for me to give it a better grade. I think it's a missed opportunity, but at the same time, I think other people will like it for other reasons, so I understand why people like this movie. I just wasn't one of them.
For myself, prior to bringing this movie into our review and watching it, I probably haven't seen the movie in probably 5 years, give or take. So I was definitely interested in watching it again. And as I'm watching it, I definitely had a different view than when I watched it 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. It's definitely evolved over time, especially now as I'm comparing it to other movies of like character, as I'm comparing it to some of the past Sydney Pollack movies that we reviewed. I do agree a lot with Ken's dissection of the movie. There's a lot of things that I have problems with, a lot of missing holes, if you will, that could have been filled in, a lot of stuff that really was like, okay, really? Stabbed with a spear and a hatchet in the back, and you just keep going on. And, you take it with a grain of salt as a movie. I understand that, but it does stick in the back of your mind. The cinematography in this movie is incredible. It's always been one of my favorite movies when it comes to cinematography. I would really love to see this in some type of a 4K type of remaster, but it would have to be a really, really good remaster. Maybe someday. I've looked and I haven't heard anything about this being remastered. It's obviously not one of your top 100 movies of all time that's going to be remastered, but overall, it's a movie I enjoy watching. It's definitely not one of my favorite Sydney Pollack movies. It's not one of my favorite movies of all time, but I enjoy watching this movie. I enjoy Robert Redford a lot in this movie. He is one of my favorite actors of all time. There could have definitely been a lot more character development when it came to Jeremiah Johnson, the family, the characters that he intermingles with. But overall, it is a movie that I enjoy. I think it's a movie that has a lot of winning characters, a lot more stuff that is positive than negative in this movie. And I think if you do watch it, you first off have to like Western movies. You have to like survival type of movies. So if you enjoy those, I think you are going to enjoy this. And I give it a little bit better of a grade than Ken, but I understand where he is when he said it. I give it a C+. Ted, wrap us up, man. Take us home.
Well, before I really get into the heart of my review, I want to thank Eric for bringing this movie to us, because I'm happy that I got to discover this movie. I don't know if I would have gotten to see the movie had we not done it for the podcast. So to start off with, I'll start there. We'll start off with what really, really works. The cinematography of this movie is second to none. It's borderlining on epic as far as how it's shot. It's maybe not up to like Lawrence of Arabia type cinematography of the landscapes and things, but it's close. It is really, really beautifully shot. The best way that I can compare this particular movie as far as how it's shot, the shots of the wilderness in The Hateful Eight by Quentin Tarantino and Brokeback Mountain by John Woo. Amazingly shot movies, if for nothing else. They're just absolutely gorgeous. Robert Redford works here. I have thought that Robert Redford is an amazing actor for a long time. His acting ability here, he makes you like this guy. And I think that's one of Robert Redford's most endearing qualities as an actor, is that he makes whatever character he embodies, he makes you like them. And you have a connection to him. I feel his pain when he runs into the cabin and he sees his family dead. I feel that pain with him. It's a special kind of actor that makes you feel things like that. I love the little strange characters that are sprinkled in through the movie, where you meet Bear Claw and you meet even the crazy lady who had lost her family, and of course, and then Dell, who you don't really know if he's a good guy or if he's a bad guy, but then you find out that, heck, he's probably Jeremiah's best friend and at the end of the day. So there's a lot to like here. The music lets the cinematography down. That's borderline on tragic. With the right score, this is an epic movie. That's one of the biggest places where it's lacking. And I agree wholeheartedly with Ken that a little bit of a narration to add connective tissue to the story. And that's the sort of thing that adds meat to the bone. I think with those two things, that could have incredibly improved the storyline of the movie. If those two things had worked, you might be able to forgive the montage sequence where he gets a myriad of wounds that should cause death. At the end of the day, I'm glad that I own the movie. I'm glad that I've seen the movie. I will watch the movie again. Probably not in the near future, but I will watch it again. I know, Eric, you had said that you would like to see the 4K restoration, and I would be interested to see if somebody has a 30 millimeter or 70 millimeter version of this movie that they could put on the big screen. I think that would be really amazing. It's to
I
see
might know
those,
someone that has that.
to see those pictures on the biggest screen possible would be amazing.
I think that would improve my grade even.
Yeah, this movie is a solid C+. If the music had been better, we're looking at a solid B. That's how much the movie let me down. I just can't get over that. It's a solid C+ for me. I think it's a good movie. And if you've never seen it, I think you should watch it, because it's worth a watch just to see the cinematography.
I think we can all agree on that.
I was surprised to see that our grades were kind of similar almost, even though I kind of torched it a little bit more than you guys did. But when it was all said and done, I think we saw the same film.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
But I do like the idea of what Ted said about seeing it on the big screen. I think this type of film deserves the big screen treatment. Even on a 65-inch or on DVD or Blu-ray or whatever, doesn't do it justice, because the star of this film is the scenery. It's the scenery and Robert Redford, and everybody else are back players. If you're watching on anything other than the big screen, you're lowering the performance of the scenery.
It's a quintessential American story, too. This is the lore that built America.
Boy
These
meets
stories.
forest, boy loses forest.
Yeah, pretty much. Maybe I'm weird, but what kid never got caught up in the stories of Lewis and Clark from leaving civilization in the colonies and going out west to discover? It's pretty awesome.
That might be a Mississippi on the banks of Mississippi thing, because I'm
Maybe.
not one of those guys. So, Ted, where can people find us on Twitter?
At Twitter, we are at movie_marquee with 2 E's.
Awesome. You could also find us on Facebook. Just type in the Movie Marquee. Ask to be part of this group. There's a check on you. We have to, blood type and all that good stuff. Just kidding. But we have a nice little community growing. We worked out a few bugs that were getting in the way in some invites, but those have been resolved. So we're very happy to see our community grow. Ted, you're up next for a Kevin Smith film. So what Kevin Smith film will we be watching next?
Well, I finally made the decision. Unfortunately, you two are going to have to work to watch Clerks 2. Sorry, guys.
Comes with a job.
It does.
Because I think it's funny. And I think it's funny that you don't like it.
We'll see how funny it is once we do it.
Yeah, maybe
maybe
we'll change. Who knows?
I highly anticipate. I look in my crystal ball and I see D's in my crystal ball. And
you never know.
Well, I appreciate you guys coming out, especially Eric. He's been battling a little COVID and trying to, he's getting through a hard cough. So if you were like, Eric doesn't sound like Eric, he's a trooper and he went forward to do this. And we remotely record these podcasts. So if you're wondering if we get together physically, no, not at this particular time, but eventually we hope to do so.
Thanks for joining us, folks. Have a good one. We'll talk to you next time.
See you at the movies.
All right, we'll see you next time at the Movie Marquee.